Oh, hi. You're just in time. I'm Pants404. This is Entertainment Value, and I want to talk to you about a game that's very near and dear to my heart, Warhammer 40k Darktide. Now, the first time I heard about Warhammer 40k Darktide, I thought, what a terrible name, and what the fuck's a Darktide? Also, do we really need another shitty Warhammer game? But then I found out it's like Vermintide, but in space, and thought, well, why didn't you fucking lead with that and call it Vermintide 3, Rats in fucking Space or something? Anyway, then I played the game, and it's good. This game fucks, and I fucks with it. So, I'm Pants404. Welcome to Entertainment Value. Let's take a look at Warhammer 40k Darktide.
For 10,000 years, the Imperium has dominated the galaxy. There is only war.
Rats in fucking space or something. I'm Pants404, and I'm here with Cultural Rogue and Fear Agent, and we're Entertainment Value. For each review, we utilize a proprietary pricing algorithm written and tested by us and measured against industry standards. The model is designed based on the value a gamer gets out of a game, not the value a company perceives from their product. We are not sponsored or partnered with any developers, publishers, or game industry professionals, nor will we ever utilize game copies or keys provided by any parties with an interest in the success of that product that we are reviewing. That way, you know the price that we calculate for you is the highest price you should consider paying. If you'd like to know more about our methodology, leave a comment.
Alright, now that that's out of the way, let's kick off this review. Today we're going over Warhammer 40k Darktide, a 4-player co-op first-person shooter which draws its world building from the popular tabletop game. If you've ever played Left 4 Dead, it's the same style of gameplay. Enter an area with a team of 4, fight off waves of enemies while finishing the level's objectives, get in, kill stuff, do stuff, survive, get out, rinse and repeat. Expect to see the usual archetypes that come with this game type. Hordes of enemies, including both ranged and melee elites, some bosses, as well as a variation of different baddies that will pin or immobilize a player. These enemies are generated by a director AI that determines what to throw at you based on certain triggers and actions. This Slaughterfest is brought to you by Fatshark, a game developer based out of Sweden, specifically Stockholm, as in Stockholm Syndrome, which is a bit on the nose considering how your character is going to be treated throughout the entire game. Let's hand things off to Pants404, who can tell you a bit about Fatshark's business model.
Let's start off with Fatshark's origin story. Now, they were founded in 2008 and mostly did subcontracting work on AAA titles for companies like Paradox Games. It wasn't until 2014 when they sold BitSquid, a game engine they developed, to Autodesk before they had enough money to actually create their own titles. And when they'd realized that nobody was making a Left 4 Dead 3, well, that's when they decided to go after Vermintide. They saw a lot of success with that and the successor title, Vermintide 2, enough that in 2021, Tencent swooped in and picked up the company. And Fatshark has about 90 employees. The fact that it's also owned by one of the largest gaming conglomerates on the planet makes it very hard to call it an independent company. Now, you might be asking yourself, Pants, why are you telling me this origin story? Here's why. It's important to understand that when Darktide started, it was an independent company, and then within the last year or so, it was picked up by Tencent. So, the model for business has changed, and we can see that very clearly in the way that the launch and everything since launch has progressed. let's start with what Fatshark is known for: having a tight-knit but active community that constantly provides them feedback. Number 2, very poor launches. Historically, Vermintide 1 and 2 launched terribly, and they waited for customer feedback before they made changes to the game. Number 3, they're known for poor transparency and poor management, regularly missing deadlines, scrapping roadmaps, and not delivering fully on promises until the community made enough noise that they felt like they had to do it. Which brings us full circle to how the business model is changing. They're taking full advantage of what the community is used to engaging with. Basically, a poor launch with poor transparency and really shitty management, while sneaking in a new focus on Twitch drops and microtransactions. Now, a lot of the pushback in the community is, hey guys, these are only skins, these microtransactions aren't a big deal. But the reality is, the microtransaction shop works flawlessly, and so did Twitch drops from day one, yet we are missing a ton of systems in place that we all expect. Like, we can list them out right now. Obviously, it's going to be a storyline right off the bat. That's the most obvious. Of course, there's crafting, a coherent reward system. Hell, player interactions in the main hub that's literally designed for social activity, but the only thing you can do in there is text chat or show off your skins. And honestly, it wouldn't be that egregious if they didn't push launch 3 times and then launch so terribly. They had queues as high as 16,000 players waiting on day 1, with a lot of server downtime and crashes and disconnects that lasted for weeks. Crashes were so bad the first week that I had a day where I actually crashed 8 times in a row, right at the end, perpetually keeping me at level 7. I couldn't get to 8 because by the time I logged back in, that game was already over. They also launched with 0 GPU optimization. Obviously, that probably led to a few crashes on its own, and no support for ray tracing. Honestly, this is still an issue today, and optimization in this game seems very hit and miss. We'll get to that later, because I want to concentrate on the fact that with all these issues occurring, microtransactions were ready on day 1. Which is a very clear message from Tencent and Fatshark on the things that they find most value in. And that is fair. It is a business. It needs to make money to engage and continue to create content. We totally get it. However, just going to call out here, our job is to call out the value for the consumer, not for that company. Now, let's talk about another phase of this launch: marketing. Their marketing was crazy lackluster and very underwhelming. We were all actually really surprised watching it. Their teasers, their trailers, interviews leading up to the game launch, like, we just didn't find it very interesting. Of course, we were excited for a Fatshark game. We love the Vermintide series. We love Warhammer 40k, but we were just kind of shocked that we put together a better hype trailer than they did, and we learned how to video edit like 30 days ago. So there's really no excuse. It kind of goes back to that poor management. The area where they actually did a fantastic job was by using creators to do their marketing for them. Of course, they have that press package in there. And I hate to say this, just gonna kind of call this out. All of the creator feedback was super positive, and a lot of folks alluded to the fact that they thought it might be a perfect game, which just seems crazy to those of us that played the pre-alpha through launch and are continuing to play today. Now, don't get me wrong, we really like this game, and there's a lot of aspects we actually love. And one of those is their data security. They're using easy anti-cheat. We're not seeing a lot of game hackers. Of course, it's a co-op game. You wouldn't expect a lot, but it's nice to have that in place. And they have a fantastic record for keeping data integrity. So we definitely want to give them props there. Now, speaking of data, let's transition to our data portion of the review. We're going to start off with players and viewers post-launch. Now, as you can see here, there is a negative trend. It's something we would absolutely expect after launch. But how does this compare to other titles in the industry that are similar? If we take a look at Darktide against Back 4 Blood and World War Z, we see that Darktide players declined at a 42% rate over the first 2 weeks, while Back 4 Blood and World War Z players were significantly less. Of course, there were less players in World War Z, so that makes a lot of sense. However, it's still heavier than Back 4 Blood. And if we compare that to Twitch viewers, We can see here that it took a major hit at 79% decline in 2 weeks, which is far heavier than any other title in the industry that's comparable. Now, let's see what that did to their bottom line. Darktide was in the number 2 slot globally for sales at launch, just behind Modern Warfare 2. It was such a big deal that Tencent actually spoke about it in their Q3 earnings. Now, today, they're in 18th, clearly being hit by a poor launch and the feedback from the community. Which brings us full circle on the business portion. Obviously, they haven't learned anything from their previous launches, and the new pressure from Tencent is really underscoring that. Okay, let's move on.
Let's talk about customization. Overall, it's pretty standard. You can adjust key binding, gore, profanity filter, and so on. Audio settings are standard as well. However, something worth noting here is that the mic is set to muted by default, which is frustrating and means there are probably a lot of people out there just talking to themselves. Graphically, exactly what you would expect, with the exception that as far as low, medium, and high presets go, they just don't feel optimized. We would suggest optimizing with NVIDIA GeForce's recommended settings. However, even with that, expect FPS drops and crashes, especially if you're using ray tracing. The user interface is pretty minimal, but in a good way. The general look and feel during gameplay and shop interactions feel smooth and non-intrusive. However, some key features and quality of life improvements are missing, like the ability to hide the in-game overlay. Also, some cutscenes seem to have forced subtitles even though they've been switched off. The player hub is third person only, which feels out of place since the rest of the game is in first person. However, the hub doesn't act as a player meeting place since interactions are limited to text chat. It's more like the intent is to showcase cosmetic skins in order to drive FOMO.
Now let's talk about where this game really shines, in the game and content section. The environment and character design is epic. The level of detail is unparalleled for an indie game. It feels like a AAA game. Same with the level design. Whoever put this together did a fantastic job. The level of detail on just the movement is crazy. When you're sprinting, you can see your character shifting their grip on a melee weapon for a better hold. Also, the sound is fantastic. You're going to use audio cues constantly in this game. It's going to really pull you in. It feels so much like 40K. It's crazy. It's going to keep you enthralled and always on your toes, and becomes doubly important when you're in a blackout mission where the power goes out and you can't see shit. The music as well here is going to really enhance your experience. It's literally award-winning. It hit PC Gamer's best soundtracks of all time, and honestly, it deserves every single award that it gets. The game starts you off by letting you choose between 4 unique classes. The veteran sharpshooter's up first, who's more apt to range combat and has complementary gunplay. They feel a lot like a Space Ranger, and they're veteran soldiers that makes them great at following orders. Next up, we've got the Zealot Preacher, who relies on melee combat with abilities that complement crits and toughness. They kind of feel like a mix between space rogues and paladins, and their undying loyalty to the God Emperor makes them fantastic at following orders. Now, up next, we've got Ogryn. These are giant tanks that excel at high damage outputs to single targets with abilities that complement tanking. You can think of them as space ogres, and they're big and dumb brutes, which makes them great at following orders. Finally, we have the Psyker, who specializes in chaos sorcery using magic and stabs. These space wizards are outcasts fighting for redemption, and they find the only way they can do it is by following orders. Did we mention you're gonna be following orders in this game? Because you will be. Now, once you've chosen a class for your character, it's time to create their physical appearance, backstory, and personality, all of which are harsh as fuck and ties directly into 40K. It feels great. Now, good luck making a character that's beautiful, friendly, or from a stable household. That shit's not going to be possible in 40K. So if you had your heart set on creating that next Taylor Swift character, I hate to dash your dreams, kids, it's not gonna happen. Now, once you're done picking your tats, which you're never gonna see again because you're wearing clothes the entire game, it's time to drop into the bleak, war-torn galactic chaos that's Warhammer 40K. You begin as a prisoner doing time for a crime you may or may not have committed, based on your chosen backstory. During your sentence, a prison break occurs on the prisoner transport that you're on as it falls under attack by a mysterious group of heretics that look as ugly as you do. During the attack, you save a ranking officer that allows you to redeem your past actions through service to the Emperor. Specifically, you're a meat sponge meant to soak up lead and blood as you're thrown at the front line fighting off hordes of plague-infested zombies, demon hosts, and a giant slug that felt a hell of a lot like COVID over the last couple years. But unlike COVID, which feels like it's never ending, Darktide's story abruptly ends at the prologue, only to tease you continuously through their lack of storyline by giving you segmented cutscenes that have nothing to do with anything that's going on in the game. 90% of these cutscenes say some form of, "I can't believe you're still alive, you're still a piece of shit. Did we also mention you should follow orders?" Which feels like so much wasted potential after creating this backstory. You're in this 40K universe filled with tons of lore, and for some reason, they just didn't put in a storyline. The only place you see your personality actually coming through is when you're in game and your player characters are talking to each other, which is a really nice touch, and the voice acting's phenomenal. However, it doesn't fill the void of not having a plot. Fatshark's idea here was that you would get random bits of story from each level as you played through them that would allow you to create your own custom storyline, but that just feels like an unfinished game with a hodgepodge of mission objectives and no real tie to an overarching story, and so you're not really connecting the dots to that 40K lore. However, the game's levels and environments are fantastic. They're at the top of their class with level design, and the level of detail really pulls you into that Warhammer 40K universe. But while impressive and well designed, the 5 environments or zones in Darktide have very little variation between them, and a lot of the time you find yourself in just a dimly lit dungeon of some kind. Now, while this does nail some of the feelings of 40K, it does no justice to the different settings of Hive City in the lore, and let's be honest, cities in general. Would love to see having a fight up the giant tower up to the top and extracting from the roof, or, maybe you fight through a ship junkyard, or even just a level that's completely outside would be fantastic, as honestly most of 40K exists outside. Now, on top of that, after about 30 hours or so of gameplay, you're going to have seen and experienced everything Darktide has to offer, aside from max level gear and possibly damnation if you haven't taken the dive yet.
On that note, attaining a loadout that you're going to be happy with in the endgame is going to take you the majority of your time. Weapon upgrading is missing way too many features to do that effectively. Unfortunately, RNG and a lackluster reward system essentially force the player to settle for less over and over, because you need good gear to match progressive difficulty and are level locked out of getting a decent base stat to build off of. If Fatshark were able to implement a similar reward and crafting system to what they've proven to be able to do with Vermintide 2, it would be a non-issue. Instead, they created an artificial slowdown to progression, which feels like an intentional way to hide a lack of content. The call out here is due to level locked items. There is no point in spending resources to upgrade a weapon you acquired from earlier levels. Pro tip here, don't waste your time upgrading low base level items. Save your resources for upgrading a top tier weapon that comes out of the gate with the best base rating. Otherwise, you'll find yourself starting from scratch with a weapon that has normal rarity but outshines the legendary weapon you crafted a few levels ago. And don't even get me started on the overinflated costs for lazy in-game cosmetics. Get ready to shell out $85K for the same tunic in a different color. We're not quite done with the RNG yet. Let's talk about the playable maps and what to expect as far as gameplay loop. You can quick launch a random map based on difficulty level, or you can select a map directly if you're looking for some semblance of choice. The maps, objectives, and modifiers available, however, are predetermined by RNG. There are 5 zones to choose from, which have different starting locations determined by the chosen objective type and can have challenge factors added to them. For example, increased hordes, toxic gas, or reduced vision. The more layers of difficulty and bonus objectives you have, the more in-game currencies you earn. Those currencies can be spent in the game's hub at various locations to acquire gear and upgrades for your loadout. So, how difficult is this game? The game is as challenging as you'd like it to be. There are 5 levels of difficulty to choose from, ranging from easy to expert. The grind can be shortened by attempting higher difficulties. However, constantly dying because of being underleveled and undergeared is likely to be a waste of time in the long run. So, we would recommend starting at the second tier until level 10, where you can Leroy Jenkins the fuck out of hordes without your teammates holding you responsible for your actions. Then, from level 10, stay in the third tier until you reach level 30 when you start acquiring decent gear. From there, you should be equipped enough to try higher tier difficulties. Another thing worth mentioning as far as difficulty goes is that the director AI can be ridiculous sometimes. For example, throwing 2 bosses and several elites at the players at once, even on the lowest difficulty level with no modifiers. As always, we can't talk about any game without going over cool factor and funness. To put it simply, Darktide is very cool, easily the best 40K game to date. It has great immersive stylization choices with graphics, audio, and gameplay. As soon as I entered the world, I became a part of it, and was ready and willing to be the Emperor God's indoctrinated meat puppet. Darktide is definitely addicting, especially when playing with friends. Nothing beats the visceral feeling of charging into battle with a heavy chainsword and an ogred companion. However, where Darktide loses some cool points is in the lack of story and unintuitive reward system, which we think damages the game's overall potential.
Let's talk about additional content and planned support. This is a game as a service, so we do expect a lot of DLC coming in the future, probably some free and some paid, like they did with Vermintide. It's probably going to include a storyline and some of those coming soon options that you saw in the game, like crafting and maybe player profiles. They already did respond and say they will have emotes and some of these other options that it sounds like they built the systems for them, but didn't implement them with launch, which is not just frustrating, it's such a big letdown because we had such high hopes. Fatshark, get your shit together. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Now, we're going to kick this off with pros and cons. After that, we're going to talk about our price, give you some final thoughts, and then look at what's the most common user feedback and does this game actually meet the hype. Let's start off with pros. Right off the bat, it's got award-winning audio. It has an impressive level design and fantastic graphics. It's got addicting gameplay, especially with friends. It has an immersive world that really nails that Warhammer 40K tone and really attention to detail. It also has a passionate fan base and active community. Okay, now what are the cons? There's no story or campaign, wasting systems in place that could easily utilize extensive lore. It's not finished. There's multiple systems that actually say coming soon, like crafting and player interactions. It's full of bugs, crashes, and disconnects that are regular even weeks after launch, even on high-end gaming PCs with fiber internet. They launched with no optimization, literally no RTX card support or ray tracing support that led to a ton of crashes. There's cosmetics in the game that are just lackluster. Every system from the hub to the loading screens feel like they're set up to drive FOMO. And finally, an unbalanced and poorly thought out reward system that leads you to feel like there's no payoff for this grind. Alright, now that the pros and cons are in place, let's check out our final price. Drumroll please, $38.11. Fatshark was able to achieve this because they really did have that award-winning audio, impressive level design, addicting gameplay, and honestly a world that really just pulls you directly into 40K. Now, here's how Fatshark can actually raise their value. The number one thing they could do is add in a storyline. That is going to fix a majority of these issues. Also, of course, keep working on fixing those bugs and bringing us optimization. Also, add in crafting and those coming soon features that we expected at launch. Give us some skins that don't feel lazy, like you just change the color of the same tunic. And finally, give us a reward system that feels a bit more balanced towards the effort that we're putting in. If I beat a damnation level, I definitely expect to get a gift from the Emperor. Alright, let's take a look at what the most common user feedback is. It's an unfinished game. Wow, who knew? Of course, we agree with them. Alright, wrapping this up. Now, does the game meet the hype? Today, unfortunately, it just doesn't. However, it probably will in the future. So in 6 months, we're going to revisit this and check out the value of Darktide then. So please stay tuned and be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you get the notification for our future reviews. As always, check us out on social medias. We'll see you next time on Entertainment Value.